Kids these days, or even people who grew up playing Pokemon, everything is a lot more busy. There's a lot more things competing for a person's time than there were back then. For example, there are so many free games you can play on your phone now, there's so many entertainment options, so making it a little bit easier to play is a reason for that. Back when I was younger, someone would buy us a game and that was the only game we had, so we had to play it. I don't think that's really the case for many people these days. These past few years, a Japanese RPG franchise has been adding new installments to an old IP, and it's a no-brainer to fans of the series over a long period of time that the new games are a little bit easier than the old ones. Now it should be obvious which franchise I'm referring to. Obviously, I was talking about Final Fantasy XVI Rebirth and Remake. Many RPG gaming franchises that built their names on these kind of OG games, I've realized something pretty similar to the Masuda quote that I read to y'all earlier. The gaming landscape is just different. So, these games that came out during the golden age of RPGs, Pokemon, Final Fantasy, even Super Mario RPG, had to find their own way to grow with their fans, to grow with their audience. Let me explain. I used to be part of the crowd that said that Pokemon games were just getting too easy. My first mainline Pokemon game was Pokemon Diamond, a game that introduced me and forced me to get up on all of the Pokemon strategies that I could at that time as a kid. So simple stuff like stab, held items, and grinding. I'll never forget when Rourke, the first gym leader in that game, made me delete my save file, restart the game, and choose Turtwig as my starter because he was banging my little Chimchar. And even thinking back to the older games, the crazy level curve and the crazy Whitney gym battle in Pokemon Crystal, the unfair and infamous Brock gym battle in Pokemon Yellow. Even the Team Aqua and Magma battles in Emerald were enough to make a little kid crash out. But those days are over. People love to reminisce about those days, and rightfully so. Those games were and still are very legendary to this day. By the way, Nintendo, a serviceable emulator system, more serviceable than the Nintendo Switch emulator you gave us, would solve all of your piracy issues in an instant, my friend. But anyways, the things that we don't choose to remember about the old Pokemon games, like the grinding, the urban legends, and most importantly, the super linear Pokemon teams we had. The super linear Pokemon teams we all had. In the old games, you weren't supposed to skip trainer battles because that would hoe you at the next gym. But you didn't know that. In the older games, you spent hours theory crafting a way to get under a random truck to find a Mew that didn't exist. But you didn't know that. In the olden days of Pokemon, our general team was the starter, the Route 1 bird Pokemon, the water Pokemon that knew waterfall, surf, or dive, or all three of those, the HM slave, the random dragon Pokemon, and the legendary, and then completing the Pokedex was a post-game activity that 99.9% of people skipped. But, you know, gotta catch them all, right? Right? The newer games actually address those issues pretty well in a way that modernizes the game for the 2020s in a way that Final Fantasy did before. And Square Enix was praised for that because those people realized that people just aren't playing JRPGs anymore. So actually, you know what? Let's take some time to address the biggest culprit of this whole Pokemon is getting too easy, whatever, is the XP All. People love banging on the XP All, and they especially don't know that it was actually introduced in Gen 1. Bet you didn't know that. But does this new version of the XP All make the game easier? Yes, that's if you were playing Pokemon as if you were playing an older Pokemon game. Pokemon's catchphrase was always catch them all, but the older games weren't really geared to that as much, even with rosters of around 100 to 200 Pokemon in them. In a weird way, the old Pokemon games were actually structured in a way that was a lot different than the way the anime was structured. The anime was more of a collection of main characters having whimsical adventures with their Pokemon, checking in with Professor Oak and everybody else every once in a while. The games were structured kind of like JRPGs were structured. You start from zero and then you grind your way to the top, and then that's how you complete the adventure. I am not going to sit up here and explain RPGs to you guys. You guys understand because I'm growing with my audience. Shit. The new games encourage players to encounter one of the 1,000 Pokemon that can possibly be in a Pokemon game at any point in time, compared to the 151 or the 200 that were in the older Pokemon games. And that way you can have a constant rotation of Pokemon on your team. No longer are we building Pokemon teams that are the strongest to survive, or hey, I need somebody that needs to learn Fly eventually and also be a useful member of the team. But now in the new games, they encourage you to choose a Pokemon based off of likability and ooh, I want that one. Similar to the anime, one would say. That could also address another of the genwunners' complaints of new Pokemon, where Game Freak is designing Pokemon to be more visually appealing than cool looking. if that makes any sense. Plus, building a game where you're building a Pokemon team just solely based off of Pokemon that you like, not off of HMs or power or anything like that, people are more likely to get IRL attached to a Pokemon and therefore IRL attached to the Pokemon franchise, therefore bringing in a new generation of trainers. This is starting to sound like a Pokemon ad or something. In a lot of the older games, gaming consoles like the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color severely limited how many Pokemon you could actually put in a game. So a lot of players could generally know all the information about Pokemon before even starting their adventure, just based off of memory. If you were a fan of the franchise that played Pokemon over and over again, like me, then you basically knew more than Professor Oak before even choosing your starter. The new games are designed for you to be open to new encounters because there's no way that you're gonna know everyone. Also, just like how it was in the anime, and I'm gonna start to sound like a broken record, but in the old games, people carefully sculpted a team like they were sculpting the statue of David or something. People carefully crafted a team since choosing their first starter. And based on who your first starter was, you kind of got a general idea of what your team would look like. Whether you would need a water type, whether you would need a flying type because one of the starters has a flying ability or something like that, and how well your starter kind of matched up with the gyms and the Elite Fours type advantages. Now, you don't need an HM slave, you don't need a token water type, and you don't need to make those tough decisions of leaving a Pokemon you actually like behind just because it got a little too underleveled. Pokemon entirely is different now. There's like 1,000. Kids these days, or even people who grew up playing Pokemon, everything is a lot more busy. There's a lot more things competing for a person's time than there were back then. For example, there are so many. Since then, the Nintendo Switch has come out, and it's just become that much easier to swipe out of a game like that and load up Fortnite or any other mobile game on the App Store. Both free titles that are that kids love and they have access to almost. It's easier to get than candy. Actually, like that's not even hyperbole. Candy costs money. So they can click out of the Pokemon game that their parents bought them for $60 and just click on Fortnite, any mobile game ever, or YouTube. And it just wasn't like that for many of the older Pokemon fans that are complaining about the new games now. A lot of people used to come down Christmas morning, you got one game under the tree and that was your game. No Game Pass, no free games, no, none of that. But just like anyone making a living out of creating things over time, you have to find your own little ways to grow with your audience. And disregarding public opinion, Pokemon has kind of found a way to do that in its own weird way. And I don't blame it. I felt the need to make this video because there was just a lot of talk about the newer Pokemon games and every time a Pokemon game comes out for the Switch or whatever this new console is going to be, you can always hear those genwunners rising up and revolting against the new system. Not the new Nintendo system, but the new Pokemon system. And I feel like as someone who didn't exactly grow up in the times of Gen 1 or 2 or 3, as somebody who went back and played those games, I feel like there's just different ways to enjoy Pokemon now, and we kind of asked for a game to be more like the anime. That's kind of what we wanted, and the Pokemon Company has delivered with that, with Pokemon Go and with all of these new Pokemon games that emphasize things other than battling, I guess. And now there's a whole bunch of people that play Pokemon for totally different reasons, whether the Pokemon Pokedex collectors, the shiny hunters, the competitive battlers, the story, the Tamagotchi people, there's so many different reasons to play Pokemon now. You don't really see this with other Nintendo titles, but people love to hate on the Pokemon games day one. I know Scarlet had some reasons that people didn't like it, okay? Yes, but you can't nitpick these Pokemon games. Even when Pokemon Sword and Shield came out, people hated that for some reason. I played it and I didn't hate it. I actually really liked it. And knew some other people who weren't familiar with the Pokemon franchise that felt the same way. So yeah, we have to give this new Pokemon game the fair shot it deserves. Thank you for watching The Bread Show. Thank you for sticking with me this long. If you stuck with me this long, you are sure to like a lot of my other videos. I have a lot more where this has come from. We play games, we talk about games, and not just Pokemon, but I love Pokemon, so might as well talk about it a lot. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for tuning in. Spread love, give inspiration in all you do, and peace out.
Welcome to The Bread Show. Take 2.